Alright guys, let's talk about the master bus. When you're about 95% to 99% done with your song, you've done all the production, you've added all the musical elements, you've done most of the mixing, it's time to move on to the master bus. And there are a few must-have plugins that you have to have on your master bus to make your song sound full, complete, and how it should be. In this example, I'm going to be using exclusively stock Logic plugins, just so you don't have to go buy Waves or Sound Toys to get a full sound and really utilize the master bus. So let me hop right into it, show you guys a couple of these tools. So the master, you usually only hop onto the master bus once you're completely done with the production and even the mixing. But for this case, I pulled up a by no means finished beat, but for the sake of this example, I'm gonna pretend like it's finished. So there are a few things that are pretty much the pillars that you need to have on your master bus, pretty much on every song. Of course, there are some exceptions with certain elements and plugins, but there are a few foundational things that you have to have. Me personally, I like to always have an EQ, whether or not I actually even do anything on it. For me, it's just useful to see the master frequency and have how everything is kind of behaving. So here I can get an idea of how everything is sounding just based off looking at the frequency. So I like to keep that there, and sometimes depending on towards the end of the the production or the mastering process, I decide, okay, maybe the bass is a little too heavy, just drop it down a little bit. But it's very minimal, and it's usually reduction rather than adding. Actually, I never add on my EQ on a master bus. I only reduce, I only take away. And pretty much that goes for most of the time I use EQ, period. You rarely ever want to use EQ as an additional thing. You want to use it more as a subtractional thing, to take away frequencies rather than adding them, Another thing that I like to have on every single master bus in some shape or another is a compressor. So for example, I'm just going to use the stock Logic compressor. And again, my master bus is usually pretty minimal. I don't like to add a whole lot to it. So, but it's the small little details that matter. So with the with the compression on the master bus, I like to kind of reverse engineer it. So here, using this compressor, I can see what is by far standing out more than everything else, and that's the bass. Look at the meter before the bass comes in versus when the bass comes in. It's barely hitting it, maybe a little bit with the snare, and then it's blowing out with the bass. So because of that, rather than going and compressing the bass like this, before I do that, I'll come down to the bass, turn it down a little bit. By doing that, I can then essentially turn everything else up slightly in the compression. So and if you guys don't know the purpose of compression or limiter or any of these other things that I'm going to mention, I'm not going to go too deep into detail about what they do. I'm just going to kind of outline what I use, and then I'll leave it up to you guys to then do more research on any particular plugin. I'll probably do another video on them specifically, but for the case of this video, I'm just going to outline what I use. So in this case, I'm going to bring down the threshold a little bit to where it's barely hitting it. Again, I like to use it very minimally. In most cases, I can hardly tell the difference, but I know that it's making a difference just because of my knowledge for the compression. After compressor, another thing that I like to use is a limiter. So a limiter, essentially what it does is it just you put a ceiling and you say no, the volume cannot reach past this level. So anything beyond that level stops there. So you have to be careful with it, because using the limiter, you can pretty much peak your sound if you use it too harshly. So you want to use it very slightly in most cases. I also like to mess around with the presets on the limiter a little bit, just because sometimes the geniuses behind whoever made those presets knows a little bit more about the makeup of this limiter than I do. So I often play around with it. But even again, going back to it, once I find something I like, I usually tone it down to probably 50% of what it actually was, just because less is more in most circumstances on the master bus. So EQ, compressor, and limiter are essentially the main foundational things that I like to use on every piece of production. I know I didn't go too deep into detail in either one of them for this video, but you know, it's up to you guys to do your research on what a compressor does, when you should use it. It's up to you to determine what songs require a limiter, what don't. For me, I usually use the limiter. To be honest, I use one of the limiters from Waves, but they all do the same thing. They essentially put a ceiling, say don't get past this level, and if it gets past that level, it turns it down. Same with the compressor, it kind of crunches the entire frequency to where if everything's going up and down wildly dramatic, it essentially can narrow it down to where it's right here. So that it's an easy way to do that, kind of reduce the margin. That way you can turn everything up a little bit. Because if everything's like this the whole time, then the peaks are going to be super loud, then the valleys are going to be super low, to where if you turn it up, you're going to be peaking up here and you're still not going to be loud enough down here. So compression essentially does this to where you can turn the whole thing up a little bit. Yeah, so those are a few things. Sometimes I like to mess with very, very, very slight reverb on my master bus, but that's only very particular types of songs that I'm working on. Another thing I like to use is imagers. I don't typically use the one in Logic. That's not because I don't like it, it's just because I'm not familiar with it, because I'm used to the one in Waves. But essentially an imager, like anything else, it pretty much puts the sound in a certain space. You could be narrow or mono, or you could be super wide, stereo, or anywhere in between. And I like to use a multi-imager on my master bus, to where I can have my low end be narrow and my high end be wide. That's just something I like to do. I've found that narrowing the low end typically makes it a little cleaner and in pocket, while opening up the wide kind of gives it more space, makes it feel a little freer, and leaves room for the vocals. So those are a few things that I like to use. Of course, case by case, there are other plugins that I like to use on my master bus, but that all depends on the sound, the song that I'm working on, and all of that. But yeah, guys, let me know if you guys have any other go-to plugins on your master bus, and I'd be sure to think about including them in mine. But for me, those are the three pillars that I like to use: EQ, compression, and limiter. Anything beyond that, I start to get kind of in the creative realm. But those are very just procedural, just by the book things that I think everybody should have on their master bus. So let me know if you guys thought this video was helpful. If you did, please help me out by hitting that like button, that comment. It's not a button, but type away, and subscribe. Yeah, guys, and let me know what you guys would like me to do a video on next. This was a recommendation of a friend to make a video on, so if you guys want to see something, please let me know. That way I know where to steer my attention and direction in terms of the videos that I make. Alright guys, that's enough for me about master buses. Like, comment, subscribe. See you in the next video.